Appreciate that. Good to see everybody here tonight. Three of you feel the same way. That's outstanding. We're off to a great start. Well, I appreciate the introduction from Mark. Mark and I have been friends for many, many years. In fact, 2 years into Elena and I owning our own business, we had a chance to start working with Mark and Ann. And we've been working with them ever since and been very, very close with them. And they're tremendous business owners in their own right. So what Mark's 100% spot on. I'm just going to talk about some perspective tonight. And I'm going to tell some stories that you may laugh at, you may not laugh at, you may connect with, you may not connect with. I think you probably will. You probably have some stories like this that are yours, different scenario maybe. And so we're going to kind of dive into it. I'm going to go pretty fast. I don't have a whole lot of time tonight. And what we're going to talk about tonight is really going to be a principle. And when I think of what a principle is, it is something that stands the test of time that you can count on. Right? It's something that you can build your business on that is unchanging. And we're going to focus on one of those principles tonight. So with that being said, you know, when you're in business for 26 years with what we do, we're fortunate to have business all over the country. And we get a chance to meet a lot of really interesting people and travel and do some very cool things. And, you know, which of course involves getting on airplanes in many cases. And I've always loved to fly. I really have. I always loved to fly. And I know the statistics. I know that, stop laughing. I have, really. And so I know the statistics. It's much safer to fly than it is to drive. And, you know, my wife and I just drove in town today from Nashville, Indiana. So I just drove 10 hours because we were out there visiting Mason and Mandy. Trust me, flying's easier. Anyway, my legs are still vibrating from the drive. I mean, you know what I'm talking about? So anyway, with that being said, I want to take you back in time. So Elena and I, again, we've traveled a lot. I've been on, I don't know how many flights. It's well over 100. Let's just put it that way. And 99.9% of the time, those flights are amazing, but sometimes they're just not. Right? I distinctly remember coming back from a conference one time. Elaine and I were flying out of I think it was Kentucky, someplace down in the southeast, and it was the springtime. And it would appear that during the spring down in the southeast, that's where all of the thunderstorms are in all of America. They're all there. All at the same time, right? They're all just right over the airport at the same time. You know, Atlanta, North Carolina, you know, Kentucky, they're all there at the same time. And Elena and I were exhausted coming off of this conference. So we get on the plane, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you before, but where you fall asleep immediately. Like you're sleeping before the plane takes off. Does this happen to you? Okay, well, it did for me. I was so tired. And again, I like flying. It's not a big deal. So we take off, and we're in the air, and I wake up, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes into the flight, and Greg, my hands are above my head. Pretty sure that's not normal, right? I mean, does that happen to you while you're laying in your bed at home? You wake up and all of a sudden your hands are in the air? I mean, does that happen to you? No, but it does when you're falling in an aircraft. Does that make sense? And you're descending at a really rapid pace, and you know, you look at other people and their hands are in the air and people are screaming, and it's just not how you want to wake up out of a nap. And so it didn't deter me from getting on another airplane, Kurt, but it got me thinking. And it didn't necessarily get me thinking about positive things. It got me thinking about negative things. Does that make sense? I mean, you're going to, and I know you understand this, but it's like the manufacturing plant for fear is your mind. It's your imagination. And whatever you choose to focus on determines how you feel. And ultimately, how you feel determines what you do. And if you focus and meditate on what a potential negative outcome can be, it ultimately creates an emotion in you of wanting to do nothing. The last thing you want to do is take strides towards that. So it just got me to think a little bit about things that, quite frankly, Johnny, I just wasn't thinking about. I just wasn't entertaining that kind of thought before about that. So anyway, long story short, I don't know, 6 months goes by, and we're on another flight flying out of the southeast, again, on our way home. And I don't know, we're at 28, 30,000 feet and just cruising along, flying through another thunderstorm. It was awesome. And all of a sudden, our plane gets struck by lightning. All the power goes out in the plane. Now, we're still in the air, but every single light in the aircraft goes out, and you hear this boom. So I look at Elena, I'm like, we're dead. You know, I mean, I'm full on concerned now, right? I mean, it's like all the lights are, and nobody says anything, you know? I mean, if only the pilot would come on, Ann, and would say, hey, it's okay. You know, we get struck by lightning all the time. You're not going to die. No, 15 minutes passes. Do you know how long it is when you're in a flying tube for 15 minutes, wondering if you're just going to plummet at any point? I mean, 15 minutes is like an eternity, right? So then he gets on 15 minutes later, and he's just super casual about it, Kathy. He's like, oh, yeah, guys, it happens all the time. You know, we were never in danger. I'm like, that would have been really useful information. I don't know, 14 minutes and 30 seconds ago, right? I mean, just throw it at us when you know. I mean, let us know right away. But again, it got me thinking, right? And so it's like that thought is now building on the next thought. And then we have another flight coming up to an Achievers, and we fly out to Orlando, Florida. It's awesome. We stay and we do this meeting after. So we stay a day later from this conference that we were at. And then we're flying back, and it's perfect weather outside. It's amazing. We're, 45 minutes from the Twin Cities, and we're at 30,000 feet just cruising along. Thomas and Mandy were on this flight with Elena and I, and I'm sleeping. So I'm at total peace. And all of a sudden, the aircraft tilts sharply to the right. It goes burn like this because one of the engines blew up in the air. It's a really good time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you're at 30,000, right? I mean, Thomas, am I making any of this up, right? This is what happened, right? A giant fireball comes flying out of one of the engines. Boom! And my son, Mason, is sitting right there. So here's what my son does. Now understand, my son he's very peaceful. He's a peaceful phlegmatic. So he slowly reaches down and he pulls out his Bible and he opens it. And just starts leafing through it for him and the other 40 casual observers who at that time were very thankful that he was leafing through his Bible. So I'm sitting up in the front area of the plane with Elena, and Thomas and Mandy are right behind us, right? And so immediately Elena and I, we start praying. That's what we do. And Thomas and Mandy are too. And it's fine. It's totally fine. But now we get off this aircraft. I take my kids to lunch. And this was one of those moments, you guys, okay? I know that I'm being ridiculous with this, but this is one of those moments where I literally saw my life flash before my, I mean, did this happen to you, Thomas, where you saw your life flash before your eyes? I did. And thankfully I didn't have any regrets, Kurt, but I did. It was like a movie on fast forward because I genuinely thought this could be it. Now, I thought that the other two times too, but this is, I mean, it's pretty real when it's on fire. Okay? And when you land the aircraft and there's a fleet of fire trucks waiting for you. So anyway, just understand that now everybody responds differently. I mean, you can't control the thoughts that come at you on a daily basis because we all encounter different things, but you do get a chance to control which ones you choose to hang on to and you choose to think about and dwell on. And it was really difficult for me to get past that one. And so I found myself, Christopher, and I found myself thinking about those three moments over and over and over again on auto repeat. Okay, now the challenge with that is we're fortunate to have business in a lot of different states. And we're fortunate to be able to travel. We really enjoy traveling. And I will tell you, driving to California is hard. Nobody wants to do that. And, driving to Hawaii, that's really difficult. Right? I mean, if you want to drive to Australia, it's a challenge. There's only one way you're getting to some of these places. And so I'm looking at this going, at some point in time, I'm going to have to get on an aircraft again. And so I would make myself do it, right? And here's what I've learned over time is, how can I say this? Action does cure fear, but it doesn't inspire bravery. Okay, I believe the right motive inspires bravery. I believe that does. Okay, but I would make myself get on the aircraft, and Ann, I got to tell you something, I wouldn't sleep the night before. And so I'd look over at Elena, and she's got no problem with it, right? Because Elena can sleep anywhere, anytime, and it takes like 12 seconds. She's just out. And so she's sleeping peacefully next to me, and I'm not. I'm up because understand that fear, when you're a hostage to fear is a thief. Its desire is to create a living posture of anxiety for you. It puts you in a position where you've got a decision to make. Either you're going to feed that fear with more thoughts, or you're going to choose to think differently. Does that make sense? Okay. And so, but I just kept playing this over and over in my mind, and so it just created more and more stress and pressure and anxiety for me, and I just couldn't sleep. And it got to the point to where it was really embarrassing. I would find myself at the airport with Elena, and she's sitting there in the chair, and she's reading, drinking her coffee, and, waiting peacefully for the aircraft. And I'm pacing in the airport because I'm sweating. I don't want to get on the airplane. And then it was really bad, when I'd see the 3-year-old child holding like a teddy bear who's like, "Let's go fly, mommy." And I'm like, okay, great. This is awesome. This is so great. The 3-year-old pushing a stroller with a baby doll has no problem getting on this thing, but I clearly have an issue. Right? So I wasn't exactly feeling powerful in the moment. How about that? But here's what I learned over time is I learned that some things you just have to choose to overcome. You just have to choose to do that. And here's when that moment was for me. It was, we had this couple get sponsored in business, and they were out in Boston. And I was going to go out and work with this couple, and I'm not driving out to Boston. It's just not going to happen. And so I had to fly out there, and I remember having a conversation with Elena saying, okay, I'm leaving tomorrow. And she said, tell me about this couple. Why did they get started in business? Do they have kids? What's their reason for doing this business? How can we help them? And so we had about a 30-minute conversation about, because there were actually a few different couples that we were going out there to work with, and we talked for about 30, 45 minutes about these different couples and why they're doing this and about their children and how we can help them. And then she said this at the end of the conversation. She said, make that your focus while you're walking down the jetway, not the flight. Okay. Here's what I took from that lesson from my wife is that, again, whatever you choose to focus on determines how you feel. And I've learned that when you're focusing on the best possible outcome, it's pretty easy to have courage. You know how much time it would take me as I'm standing in line before I would hand my ticket to the lady? It'd take about 10 seconds. That's about what it would take, because I'd have to walk from about here to the wall, just count it out, 10, 9, 8, and I would give her my ticket. She would then scan the ticket so I could get on the aircraft. And I just knew, forget about the flight, I knew that if I could walk for 10 seconds and hand her my ticket, I was committed. So for me, it was never about the flight. It was about the 10 seconds of walking time from when I was in line and they called my seat and I had to give her the ticket, because then when I'm on the aircraft, my mind was in a different place. And quite frankly, as soon as I'm up in the air and I'm drinking a diet soda, I realized that it's actually really peaceful. Okay, now what happened prior to that, how I got over a lot of this wasn't just the statement with Elena. It got to a point to where the anxiety was pretty ridiculous. And so I started seeking experts. Not counseling, but kinda, right? So I called up Alan. And I explained all of this to him. I talked about these 3 different flights, and you have to understand, Alan he's just a no-nonsense, logical kind of thinker. And when you're in that pocket, Joshua, where you're making decisions based on fear, understand that nothing you're doing is logical, and everything you're doing is selfish. Because fear is a self-serving motivation. It actually doesn't help anybody else. Its desire is to seek self-interest. That's what fear does. So the only person that gains from it is the same person who's tormented by it. Does that make sense? And that's really what your gain is. It's more torment. It's more anxiety. So anyway, I call up Alan and I tell him about these 3 different flights. And here's what he says to me. He says, that last one, where they had to shut one of the engines down, he said, that's not a problem. You can easily fly with one engine, which they absolutely did. And I know that, and it makes logical sense. Absolutely, it totally does. But when you're in that position of fear, you're making your decisions with emotion, and you're trying to back them with logic. Does that make sense? Where really what we should be doing is making decisions based on logic and then backing them with the appropriate emotion. That's a winning pattern. It wasn't a winning pattern to do it the opposite. And I learned that early on as a business owner, that I had to stop making emotional choices. I had to stop responding and reacting to people and start paying attention to what I could control and think logically about the scenario. Anyway, so I talk with Alan. He goes, you were never in danger. And in fact, Matt, if all the engines go out, They can actually glide and still land that thing. And I'm like, makes perfect sense. I'd hang the phone up and go, yeah, but you weren't on that flight. You just don't understand. I mean, it's, right? You don't feel my pain. And understand, Alan is not going to give you sympathy ever. I mean, I love him. He loves me. I know that he's like the most trusted friend that I have, right? But he doesn't pity you because he knows that you're powerful and that he believes, his personal opinion is that there's greatness in everybody, right? So he's never going to treat you like a victim. And he certainly didn't treat me like one in that moment, even though I kind of wanted to be coddled. Okay, so I just wanted to hear one time, Greg, I understand how you feel, buddy. Never happened. Just like you weren't in danger. What's your problem? So, all right. But that's not good enough. It's not good enough for me. It's not good enough for me. So we ended up having this couple get started in business way down in depth, actually downline from my daughter, Perla. And it's this guy named Todd. Now, Todd, what he does is he actually trains commercial airline pilots. I'm like, this is the perfect guy to ask questions to. He's going to understand what I'm talking about. So we drive out to Ortonville, where he lives. It's like, the pheasant hunting capital of the world, whatever. So I drive out to Ortonville, and I meet with Todd, right? And I said, okay, Todd, here's what happened. So you know what Todd's response was when I talked about the plane where the engine started on fire? He laughed at me. He goes, happens all the time. I'm like, really? Because I don't see that on the news. And he goes, yeah, I know that. It's because it's not newsworthy, right? He said, not only were you not in danger, you can easily fly with one aircraft. And he said, frankly, Matt, if they both went out, you can glide and still land that thing. Exact same words that Alan said. I'm like, were you guys talking to each other? Okay, so again, after I left Todd's presence, I'm like, I just kind of patted him on the back. Hey, thank you for telling me that. I feel great about getting on an airplane. I got in my car and I immediately said, but he doesn't understand. He wasn't on the airplane, right? Because again, when you're in fear, you want people to relate to you. You're interested in commiserating. You're not really interested in solving the issue. Okay. So then downline from Keith and Alyssa, there's a guy that gets sponsored named Shane. And Shane was actually a commercial airline pilot for a major airline that all of you fly on. So I tell Shane the story. I'm expecting Shane to say, you were in danger. Wow. I mean, that's really crazy stuff. You know what Shane did? He laughed at me. And then he listened to an audio where I talked about this stuff, and he laughed at the audio. Not to mention, Shane, next time he saw me, gave me a pair of wings. I still have them, right? Literally, he said, listen, next time you get on an airplane, just bring these. I'm like, I'm going to kick you in the kneecap, right? So I asked him, I said, okay, Shane, so, fireball comes out of the engine. He goes, happens all the time. It's not a big deal. And he said, matter of fact, you can fly great with one engine. And in fact, Matt, if both of them go out, you can actually glide that thing and I could have repeated the sentence before he said it because I had already heard it from Alan and I had already heard it from Todd. Okay, so then I have a decision to make at that time. Either I can believe the logic from the experts, or I can just choose to be irrational and lose my nerve. So I chose to believe the logic from the experts. And I chose to listen to what Elena said, where she got me to focus on what was waiting for me when I arrived. What the purpose of the journey was, and not so much about the travel itself. And I will tell you, I see a lot of people begin the journey of their business and they've got really high hopes about things. And all of a sudden they kind of get stuck someplace. Maybe you have an experience where you try to meet somebody in the marketplace and it didn't go exactly how you had it pictured in your mind. Or maybe you pick the phone up and you start making phone calls and it didn't go exactly how you had it pictured in your mind. And all of a sudden you start to become afraid, which by the way, is not a rational thing. And we'll kind of get into that in just a minute because think about this for a minute. There's actually only two innate fears that children actually have upon birth. Here's what the two fears are: the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. I got to tell you something. I've never one time sat down and had a conversation with Jason Babler where he coached me on what to do if somebody pulled out an air horn while I was showing the plan. It's just never happened, right? Where you get the notepad out and you start mapping out the compensation plan and boom! It's never happened, right? Never had a loud noise in the beginning part of the place. It's never happened. Never one time have I had a conversation with Ross Coleman where he said, okay, here's what you need to do, Jody, if you walk into the house and the floor gives out. If you go to sit down in the chair and it just comes apart and you fall unexpectedly, here's the plan. Never happened. You know why? Because it's not rational. It's not rational. Fear is not a rational response. In fact, all fear means is false evidence appearing real. That's fear. It's false evidence appearing real. But the challenge is your imagination can take something and it can create a whole new product with that something. And there's a lesson there that understand that whatever you choose to keep in your mind ultimately is going to direct your emotions, your choices, and your steps. And you are 100% in control over that. One thing that Jason Babler, Ross Coleman, and Al Leiniger taught me early on was to speak my goals, to listen to audios, to read books off of the first-year reading list. And the reason they taught me this stuff is because it's like that is how you start programming what you are keeping in your imagination. And I will tell you this, if you become an intentional thinker, I believe you have a really good chance of becoming an intentional doer. Does that make sense? Okay. So for me, that's how I was able to get past that, is I had to choose logic over emotion. And I had to hear from some of the experts. I had to choose to focus on what was waiting for me and what was the purpose behind what I was doing instead of just the action of getting there. You know, I remember many, many years ago, I had a chance to meet with Jason Babler, and we went to a Team Connect. And we sat down around a round table. And, you know, at this point in time, things were different back then. At this point in time, this is when you had hardwired phones, there were no cell phones. And everybody came with a list of individuals that they were going to call. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there that fear criticism or rejection. I get that. For some of you, it's a real thing. For others, you're like, I don't care. It's different for everybody. But for me, there was a little bit of concern. And for new business owners, I see this a lot where people tend to get a little bit concerned is where they're untrained. Right, again, if you tell me to come up here and hold the microphone and give a talk, I have no problem doing that because I've done it so many times. But if you come up here and tell me, I want you to dance, I'm terrified because I am not trained on how to do it. I'm not prepared. And so it's normal as a new business owner to kind of feel a little bit of what you would call fear. But I think you need to flip the script a little bit and understand that whenever you get butterflies, when you're about to do something that involves helping another individual, I want you to interpret that emotion or sensation as something great that's about to happen. And if you will flip the script in your mind and understand that that's really what's going to happen, I think that you'll run towards that instead of running away from it. So Jason, here's what he did. Is he sat down and he addressed everybody that was at the Team Connect. He said, okay, here's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to make 10 phone calls, each of us tonight, and we're going to trade off. I'm going to make a dial. You're going to make a dial. And we're just going to go around the table. And what determines whether or not we're successful is whether or not we make the dial and we learn something, because we can't control what other people do, but we can control our attitudes and our actions. Okay, now, I was very fortunate to learn a lot about the QI philosophy from Jason. And what this did is it took a lot of fear away from me because I learned that this is not a business of convincing and persuasion. This is not a business of manipulation. This is simply a business of matching, of having a genuine conversation with somebody and finding out if they're even looking for a product to purchase or if they're looking for a business to do, and seeing if what we do or what we sell matches what they're looking for. Does that make sense? And that's what Jason explained to me. He said, you're just checking interest when you're calling people to see if they want to sample a product. You're just checking interest when you talk with people to see if they want to take a look at a business. You're not trying to get them to do something. We are not in the business of creating interest or generating interest. We are in the business of checking interest. And he went on to say, Matt, you've been doing this your entire life. And I've heard Mark Elsenpeter teach that over and over and over again for really the last 6 months, that this is a skill set that everybody has before they even become a business owner, that you've been checking interest your whole life. So Jason just had to remind me of this. And he started making a phone call. And of course, he learned something from the call. In fact, he booked an appointment. I made a phone call and I booked an appointment, and we started booking a bunch of appointments around the table. Then sometimes we didn't book appointments, but we were 100% successful because we made the dials and we learned stuff. And I felt 10 feet tall and bulletproof leaving that meeting. Here's what Jason did. He challenged an untruth in my mind. because I felt that making phone calls was actually supposed to be difficult. And there's no amount of teaching that away to somebody, but you can sure show that away very quickly. You can demonstrate that it's not that difficult to do, and you can show people how they can get on the phone and make their own dials immediately right out of the gate. And that's exactly what Jason did. So he challenged and overcame an untruth and then demonstrated for me how to do that and then empowered me to do it myself. And that's when I started making phone calls. And I remember when I made my first phone call alone. I made Elena go downstairs. I went upstairs in our little townhouse, and I had a desk up there with no chair. And so I'm down on my knees, and I'm leaning like this, on my desk, and I'm making dials. And I'm remembering that conversation that Jason said to me. All I can do is control my activity and my attitude, and all I can do is check interest. Here's another conversation that really helped me out a lot. It was a conversation that I had with Alan Leiniger, where Alan said, and I quote, that Larry Winters taught his team back in the day when Alan was a new business owner, that the work of this business is a privilege. It's a privilege. When you get a chance to sell an amazing quality product to another human being that actually can help their life in some capacity, or you get a chance to share a business with somebody where it can help their life in some capacity, there's no greater privilege than helping another human. When you see their life improved, that is a fantastic place to be. And so that's a mindset that has been permeating the Winters team for many, many years. And then I actually had a conversation with Larry Winters one time, and this was another conversation that helped me overcome fear, was this one right here. He said, Matt, we have to remember as business owners, we have to remember that when we make a phone call, or when we sample a product, or when we do a QI, or when we show the plan, that those actions are not for you, they're for the person that you're doing it for. You have to remember that. And here's why I make that statement. Anytime we are doing anything in the business, any sort of an action, sampling products, making a phone call, doing a QI, if your modus operandi is, what can I get from this? It naturally puts you into a posture of fear. But if your modus operandi is, what can I give with this? It naturally puts you into a posture of inspiration. And so for me, what I would have to do is I would take 10 seconds. And I would just meditate. I would focus for a minute. Okay, why am I making this phone call? Why am I sampling this product? Oh yeah, I'm not trying to sell a product. I'm trying to help somebody. Oh yeah, I'm not trying to book a meeting. I'm trying to help somebody. And I would just take that 10 seconds of time. And that's all it would take for me to reset my mind and be able to do it. Because I've learned that courage over time, it's actually not a lifestyle. It's a series of good decisions that you make in the moment where you only have to have uncommon bravery for about 10 seconds. How long does it take to walk up to somebody when you're in the grocery store and maybe they're looking at something and you're looking at something and you just, for some reason, you know that you're supposed to have a conversation with this person because maybe they look familiar or whatever, and you have that moment where you're thinking, do I want to engage them or not? How long does it take for you to walk over to them? About 10 seconds. Okay, but then as soon as you're standing in front of that person, well, now you got a decision to make. I'm going to look really strange or I'm going to say, hi, my name is. I don't have to be brave through that entire conversation. I just have to be selfless for the 10 seconds that it takes for me to walk over to that person. Anyone can do that because I had this image in my mind that I had to be Joe Markowitz, that I had to be Doug Weir, I had to be Alan Leiniger. I had to be these guys that are heroes of mine in the business. And here's what I learned over time. Is they're actually not better than me, and they're not better than you. But in the moments, those critical moments where they chose to engage people, they chose courage instead of cowardice. And I could string some of those together. I could string some of those courageous decisions together, but I learned that it's not a lifestyle. It's an in-the-moment decision that typically can be made in 10 seconds. So anyway, after hearing from Alan, after hearing from Larry, and after being at that Team Connect with Jason, I remember having a moment with Ross Coleman. So I booked this meeting. It was across town. It was down in the city of Edina, and it was with a guy that was a corporate executive. And I was new in the business, less than 1,000 PV, and I called Ross and said, hey, will you come do this meeting with me? I'm not sure if this guy's going to be a customer. I'm not sure if he's going to want to look at this as a business. I'd really like to have you in on this meeting because I think he's going to relate to you. I was 23 years old at this time. The guy that I was meeting with was in his 50s. Of course, he was closer in age to Ross, and Ross said, I'll be there with you. Great. So I pull up, and it's 5 minutes before the meeting. Ross isn't there. It's 2 minutes before the meeting. Ross isn't there. It's 60 seconds before the meeting. Ross calls my phone. He said, hey, you probably noticed, but I'm not coming. I said, you're not? Kind of wanted you to be here. He said, I know you did, but you got this. I believe in you, and all you can control is whether or not you talk with this human being and that you try to help them with whatever makes sense in that conversation that you have, whether it's a business or a product. Go have a conversation. And I did that. And I remember leaving that meeting, calling Ross, and Ross the entire time, that was his plan, because he knew that if I could talk with that person, I could talk with anybody. And Ross told me something very specific at the end of that meeting. He said, Matt, here's why you should never be afraid, because you have to remember who sent you and what you carry. Even though you're in business for yourself, you are never alone. You have a team of people that have your back, that are interested in you as a business owner. And I want you to picture, Matt, Joe Markowitz standing next to you with every phone call that you make and every QI that you make. Would you be afraid to make the call if Joe Markowitz or Alan Leiniger or Doug Weir or Brent Harris or Mark Elsenpeter were standing next to you? Would you be afraid to make that dial? The answer is absolutely not, because you know they could pick the phone up and finish the call if you didn't know what to say. Okay, understand that you have that. You have that kind of support. That's there all the time. And Ross just reminded me of that. And so you know what that did? It made me want to pursue more acts of courage. It made me want to be unselfish. In fact, quite frankly, it made me grateful. And I really learned through that stretch of making those phone calls and doing QIs and showing plans and starting to actually grow our business. I really learned that, gosh, talking to people is actually really simple. And the people that we end up selling products to, the people that we end up sponsoring as business owners, they have three traits. They have desire, they have capacity, and they have gratitude or appreciation. They actually want to talk to you. They're interested in what we do. And there's actually nothing to be afraid of. I remember Doug Weir using a metaphor of a deck of cards. And this helped give me courage, right? He said, look, if you have a deck of cards and you're looking to separate out the face cards from the non-face cards, how are you going to do it? You're just going to flip them over one card at a time. Isn't that what you're going to do? Yeah. And as you turn them over, whatever the card is what it is. And you know what? Even though a 10 is really close to the value of a jack, it isn't a jack. And you're still going to put that 10 in this pile. You're going to put that jack in this pile. And he said the face cards represent people we're going to sell products to and people that are going to want to start a business in this space. And the non-face cards represent people that are not. And there's nothing you can do to change the value of the card in the pile, because whatever it is what it is. And I remember that metaphor that he used, because it really spoke to my soul. And that was actually at an event that we went to. And I left that meeting with so much confidence. And when we left that meeting, I started making phone calls and I started talking to people and I started engaging people. And here's what I learned over time is that if you choose to not overcome fear in your life, that fear ends up becoming a stronghold or an albatross. And a stronghold that is not dealt with, eventually that starts to create an abandoned purpose. And in fact, I've seen families that tend to share that same stronghold from generation to generation to generation to generation, where you have many people that are believing in untruth. It is so important that we utilize 10 seconds of courage in any moment that we possibly can to help another individual, and that we do not allow fear to hold us prisoner, because it will steal your creative capacity. It's a thief. Don't let it do that from you. But after Elena and I started taking after I started taking more action, what I saw is that courage is contagious. First off, watching my upline be courageous, watching Mike and Susan Bundy choose to bet on themselves, watching Alan and Michelle Leiniger, watching Joe Markowitz and listening to some of his iconic talks when I was brand new in the business, where he would talk about making the move of a champion. When he was driving home from work and I'm going to make a move of a champion. I'm going to stop at this mall and I'm going to have some conversations and engage people and I'm going to practice 10 seconds of courage. That stuff drove me because I wanted that in myself. I never wanted to be a coward. I refuse to be a coward. But I will tell you this, you don't have to practice bravery all the time. But when you get a chance to practice bravery, when you get a chance to utilize 10 seconds of courage, you should absolutely do it, because once you do it, you can teach it. You can teach it. You can show others that they don't have to be a superhero. They just have to choose courage in the moment. Well, after I started being consistent with this, I saw my wife, Elena, come out of her shell. Elena was really shy when we first started our business. She would hide in the bathroom, you guys, at a meeting like this one because she didn't want to talk to anybody. She was afraid to talk to people. She would wait. She would wait until we got to the meeting itself before she would put her makeup on so that she could intentionally sit in the car for 20 to 25 minutes so that everybody would be seated in their chairs. The meeting would already be started so she could walk in and not have to talk to anybody because she didn't have a good self-image. I watched my wife start to book different skincare and cosmetic parties during that stretch, and I know how much that stretched her. I know how fearful she was about that because she didn't feel that equipped, even though she had a ton of training, and she was questioning herself, but she was watching me practice 10 seconds of courage, and it inspired her to do exactly the same thing. I watched Mark and Ann Elsenpeter make some tremendous choices in their life. I've watched Ann overcome a tremendous amount of things that most people would never have to overcome, and you've never once made excuses about it, and you've always chosen bravery in the moment. I've watched Mark do exactly the same thing. I watched Thomas and Mandy McAlpine achieve platinum, fall back lower than 4,000 PV, and 18 months later, be over platinum volume again. And during that stretch, you guys never wallowed, you never licked your wounds, you never felt sorry for yourself. In fact, you chased the heat wherever it was. You got around people that were growing the business and you exhibited 10 seconds of courage. And now you guys are over 7,500 points every single month, plus. Okay. Courage is contagious. We've had lots of different good examples in this different area. There's lots of people in this room that are choosing to walk out and step out in courage at this moment. I personally believe that all of us are going to have to answer two questions throughout your business. And here's the first question that you're going to have to answer is can I? And I want you to think about that question of can I do this? Can I make this work? And I don't think that's the right question. I think the right question is, are you willing to help someone? Because if you're willing to help someone, I believe that you will step out of your comfort zone and you will literally feel inspiration hit you. I want you to go with me just for a moment. I got a couple minutes here to wrap up. If I came to you, Christopher, and I gave you 2 tickets, okay, 2 tickets to the championship game in professional football. They're each valued at about $10,000. And I gave you those 2 tickets, and you can't go to the game, and I task you to give them away to somebody. Okay, are you going to be afraid to make phone calls to give those 2 tickets away? Absolutely not, because you understand the value of those tickets. When you understand the value of who you are and what you bring to the table and who sent you, you do realize that we are backed and supported by Leadership Team Development and their entire staff and all the business support and training materials. You have an upline that is there to help you and help you navigate and coach you and create a mastermind with you. You've got Amway Corporation, who's in your corner supplying amazing products and making sure that you never go without what you need to be able to give a good product to a customer and have top-notch service. You have all of them in your corner, and you also have yourself, which you are literally the gatekeeper in my mind. That's how I see it. You are the access point. You give people the gift of access. Never underestimate the kind of value that you bring. We should never be afraid to talk to anybody. And in fact, the opposite should be true, that we should be inspired to be able to give somebody that opportunity. So the question isn't, can I? Really, the question is, will I? That's really what it is. That's the next question. And quite frankly, it's the only relevant one. Because I know that there's a lot of people out there that are a hostage to fear right now. And they're looking at their lives going, I want to take the next step, but do I need to become a completely different person to do that? No, I think you just need a change in focus. I think it really does come down to 10 seconds of courage. And I believe that anybody can exhibit that 10 seconds of courage, 10 seconds of uncommon bravery, 10 seconds of being unselfish, 10 seconds of, I'm going to focus on you. Because I want you to think about this the next time that you pick up the phone. I want you to think of the single mom with 2 kids at home, where she goes to work full time. And then she comes home and she takes care of her kids. But then she gets started in this business. And she starts selling products. And she starts sponsoring people. And she goes platinum, even with those circumstances, because I watched Becky Brown do that. And I want you to think about that the next time that you make a phone call. Are you calling a single mom like Becky Brown? You know, are you calling a single guy who is pursuing a dream of wrestling in the Olympics and thinking, this guy's not going to be interested, his plate is full, and all of a sudden he takes a look at what we're doing and he goes, I think I want to look deeper into that. And all of a sudden he engages and he chooses to put other things on the back burner, wrestling on the back burner, and says, I'm going to build this business because I believe I can find a lot of significance here. And that's Eddie Damer. And Eddie Damer is a platinum today with a tremendous business and I believe a fantastic leader. Okay, I want you to picture that. I want you to think about it the next time you're going to meet somebody at a grocery store and it's just a single guy that maybe he has blonde hair and you go to meet him and all of a sudden you have a conversation with him and he didn't have a dream. He grew up around people that just did shenanigans and didn't do anything really positive or productive with their life. But all of a sudden, he gets a chance to rewrite the narrative in his life because somebody exhibited 10 seconds of courage, and that single guy went on to go platinum and get married and have an incredible family, and that's Jake Magnuson. I was there for that conversation. I'm really happy that I chose 10 seconds of courage. I was there for a lot of this, and I will tell you, I believe that all of us have a decision to make in that moment. Whether you're making phone calls or you're meeting people, don't underestimate the power of 10 seconds of courage. Thanks.